was made last week. Somebody put that together and put it up on YouTube, and it's already garnered like 130,000 hits on it in just a week. So it's gone pretty viral, and I think we all know why. Because Pittsburghers love Pittsburgh. I mean, who doesn't love the fact that Pittsburgh has become like a feature favorite, a favorite character, a favorite setting for a ton of movies in the past? I don't know, some of those movies were pretty ancient, I think, but especially in recent history, we've seen a lot of movies filmed here. And I think there's a good reason for it. Pittsburgh kind of adopts its own character in a film. If you watch a movie and it's filmed in Pittsburgh, if you're from here and you love the city, especially if you're from here, you aren't here currently, maybe you're living around the world someplace, Pittsburgh becomes its own character. It becomes its own reason to see a movie. When I was in the desert and I was deployed in Iraq, I watched the movie The Next 3 Days with Russell Crowe. Was featured a few times in that clip. I watched it probably a dozen or so times. Not because the movie's actually any good. The movie's really kind of like, it's mediocre at best, but it has the city plays such a prominent role in that movie. If you've never seen it, I recommend it. The city is featured prominently in that. And one of the best breakfast places in Pittsburgh is mentioned in Donald's Diner down on McClure and Exeter Street. Gets a shout out in the movie. But Pittsburgh it becomes its own character when it's featured in films. For a Pittsburgher, when we went to go see The Dark Knight Rises, we didn't go see The Dark Knight Rises simply because it was the final installment of Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy. We saw it because Pittsburgh played the part of Gotham City. That's why we saw it. The rest of the world saw it because it was, a good Batman movie. It was a fantastic film. But we saw it because, well, we live in Gotham now. And that's awesome. Who doesn't want to live in Gotham City? Who's ever seen the movie Abduction with Taylor Lautner in it? Anyone ever seen that? No one's seen it. Don't waste your time. It's an awful movie. Really, really awful. Aaron and I went to go see it a couple years ago when it came out. Because Taylor Lautner, the guy who plays the werewolf from Twilight, you know who I'm talking about. Yeah, it was a big deal that he was running around the city. He was that scene in PNC Park where he slid down the glass, above the staircase. And everyone's excited because Taylor Lautner's in town, and all the girls want to see him. All the teenage girls are, ooh, wow, we're going to go see Taylor Lautner. So of course Aaron and I wasted 2 hours of our lives to go see the movie, and it was just awful. Horrible movie. Absolutely ridiculous. The worst story I've probably ever sat through in my entire life. But the city's in it, so I went to go see it. Pittsburgh, it becomes an important character in films whenever it's used by Hollywood. Pittsburghers love to see our city featured. And like I said, it takes on its own role. It takes on its own character in the movie. This morning we're continuing our teaching series through the book of Joshua by looking at another famous, perhaps infamous character from the Old Testament. A character that probably needs no introduction because, well, when we hear her name, an image instantly comes to our mind. This morning we're looking at the story of Rahab in Joshua chapter 2. And when we think of Rahab, one of the first things that comes to all of our minds, if you've ever heard of Rahab, if you've ever read the book of Joshua, if you've ever even heard of her name, is that what? She was a prostitute. Rahab was a prostitute. The story of Rahab has an incredible amount of intrigue and sleight of hand, and there's tension, there's drama, there's dramatic faith, there's espionage, there's even a hint of, something I probably should talk about, so the kids are in the room. But when we think of the story of Rahab, our minds instantly go to the fact that she was a prostitute. There's so much more to her story than we sometimes overlook because of the scandal of Rahab's profession. So far in the story of Joshua, what we've covered in the past couple chapters, or the first chapter, is that Moses has died. He's been leading the Israelites through the desert, on their way to the Promised Land. They get to the coast, the eastern side of the Jordan River, the eastern shore of the Jordan River, and Moses dies. God raises up Joshua, Moses' second-hand man, and he says, you are now in charge of the Israelites, you are now to lead them into the Promised Land. And so as we read the past couple weeks, Joshua has started doing just that. He accepts his new installment by God, and he meets with the leaders of all the tribes of Israel, all 12 tribes, and he commands them to follow him into the Promised Land, into the land of Canaan, so that they can all together as a united front take the Promised Land that God had guaranteed for all of the descendants of Abraham, together as the 12 tribes. Now into the second chapter, the invasion of the land of Canaan begins with first a little spying. So let's begin beginning with Joshua chapter 2. We're actually going to read the entire chapter this morning, so bear with us. But it's such an important story, it needs to be told all at one time. Joshua begins in chapter 2, verse 1. Then Joshua secretly sent out 2 spies from the Israelite camp of Achaia Grove. He instructed them, scout out the land on the other side of the Jordan River, especially around Jericho. So the 2 men set out and came to the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there that night. But someone told the king of Jericho, some Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. So the king of Jericho sent orders to Rahab, bring out the men who have come into your house, for they have come here to spy out the whole land. Now we're going to stop there for just a second. I want to make sure I point out something that's happening in the story. Sometimes we overlook what is happening in the original language when we translate it to English. When the New Living Translation uses the term, have come into your house, when the king of Jericho accuses these spies of going into the house of Rahab, he's literally accusing them of going in and partaking in the services of Rahab. Let's just put it that way. He's accusing Rahab of not just harboring spies. He's not assuming that they're staying there and they're staying there like a hotel or like some sort of inn. He's saying that these 2 men came into the city, and our assumption is, what we've been told, is they came to visit with you. There's a purpose there, if you get what I'm saying. If you get my gist. The story of Joshua continues. Rahab had hidden the 2 men, but she replied, yes, the men were here earlier, but I didn't know where they were from. They left the town at dusk, and as the gates were about to close, I don't know where they went. If you hurry, you can probably catch them. Actually, she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them beneath bundles of flax she had laid out. So the king's men went looking for the spies along the road, leading to the shallow crossings of the Jordan River. And as soon as the king's men had left, the gate of Jericho was shut. I always love how God does this in these stories, especially from the Old Testament. God uses what we would see as just kind of a random little detail about a story and uses it to carry on the story of his mission throughout the Old Testament. If the spies of Israel had gone into any other home, if they had gone to some commoner's home, if they had gone into a shepherd's home, if they had gone into a hotel somewhere, the king's men of Jericho likely would have invaded that house and searched it upside and down. They would have looked everywhere for these men because they would have assumed they were staying there for the night to spy out the land. But Rahab's story holds water because of her profession. Rahab's story, when she said, no, they were here, I don't know where they came from, they came and they went. You understand what we're saying here? Is that Rahab, it doesn't seem unusual to the king's men that these foreigners would have showed up into the city out of the blue, visited Rahab, and then left. That would have been totally normal at the time. Again, had they gone into a merchant's home, had they gone to a shepherd's home or something to that effect, the king's men likely would have torn through the house. Likely would have torn every wall down, looked through every nook and cranny, just to find these men. But because of Rahab's profession, because of her history, because of her reputation in Jericho, God's men are protected in the house of Rahab. Joshua continues, before the spies went to sleep that night, Rahab went up onto the roof to talk with them. I know the Lord has given you this land, she told them. We are all afraid of you. Everyone in the land is living in terror. For we have heard how the Lord made a dry path for you through the Red Sea when you left Egypt. And we know what you did to Sihon and Og and the 2 Amorite kings east of the Jordan River, whose people you completely destroyed. No wonder our hearts have melted in fear. No one has the courage to fight after hearing such things. For the Lord your God is the supreme God of the heavens above and the earth below. Now swear to me by the Lord that you will be kind to me and my family, since I have helped you. Give me some guarantee that when Jericho is conquered, you will let me live, along with my father and my mother, my brothers and sisters, and all their families. We offer you our own lives as a guarantee for your safety, the men agreed. If you don't betray us, we will keep our promise and be kind to you when the Lord gives us the land. Then, since Rahab's house was built into the town wall, she let them down by a rope through the window. Escape to the hill country, she told them. Hide there 3 days from the men searching for you, Then when they have returned, you could go on your way." Before they left, the men told her, "We will be bound by the oath we have taken only if you follow these instructions. When we come into the land, you must leave this scarlet rope hanging from the window through which you let us down. And all of your family members, your father, mother, brothers, and all your relatives, must be here inside the house. If they go out into the street and are killed, it will not be our fault. But if anyone lays a hand on them, on people inside this house, we will accept the responsibility for their death. If you betray us, however, we are not bound by this oath in any way." "I accept your terms," she replied. And she went and she sent them on their way, leaving the scarlet rope hanging from the window. The spies went up into the hill country and stayed there 3 days. The men who were chasing them searched everywhere along the road, but they finally returned without success. Then the 2 spies came down from the hill country, crossed the Jordan River, and reported to Joshua all that had happened to them. "The Lord has given us the whole land," they said, "for the people in the land are terrified of us." Here we have a woman who's effectively operating a brothel in the city of Jericho. She's a non-Israelite prostitute, a nobody in terms of God's holy people as they enter into the land of Canaan, who all of a sudden, in one chapter in the New Old Testament, all of a sudden becomes an infamous character that is remembered for thousands and thousands and thousands of years of history. Rahab gets mentioned in the New Testament because of her actions here in the 2nd chapter of Joshua. How does a woman who sells her body for a living all of a sudden turn her life around and become someone that the New Testament writers, later on in the book of Hebrews and the book of James, use as an example for us to follow? How does a non-Israelite prostitute do that? I think the answer is that she paid attention to what God was doing and simply joined him in his mission. She paid attention to what God was doing, what she had heard God was up to, what she was noticing on the horizon that the Lord of all creation was doing to the people of Israel. And when an opportunity presented itself, she took action and put action to her faith. James says this in James chapter 2 concerning Rahab. James 2 verses 19 to 24. "You say you have faith, for you believe that there is one God. Good for you. Even the demons believe this, and they tremble in terror. How foolish. Can't you see that faith without good deeds is useless? Don't you remember our ancestor Abraham was shown to be right with God by his actions when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? You see, his faith and his actions worked together. His actions made his faith complete. And so it happened just as the scriptures say. Abraham believed God, and God counted him as righteous because of his faith. He was even called a friend of God. So you see, we are shown to be right with God by what we do, not by faith alone. Rahab, the prostitute, is another example. She was shown to be right with God by her actions when she hid those messengers and sent them safely away by a different road. Just as the body is dead without breath, so also faith is dead without good works. This week there was a national headline made the news out of Maryland. I don't know if you saw it, but it was an incredibly tragic story. The headline read this: "Police say Aberdeen man was hit and killed by a train he didn't hear coming because he was wearing earbuds." An Aberdeen man is hit and killed by a train, and now police say he never heard it coming. That's because police say Kevin Scott Street was wearing earbuds at the time and never heard the conductor sounding the horn. He's the latest pedestrian to be killed because he wasn't tuned into his surroundings. Officials say Kevin Scott Street was walking on railroad tracks near Joppa Road when a 20-car freight train hit and killed him. The train had activated its horn to alert the pedestrian they were coming, but the pedestrian never heard nor saw the train. Police say Street, wearing earbuds, turned around when it was too late. Surely the man who was hit by the train believed that trains ran along the railroad tracks. Surely he was walking along the railroad tracks and believed somewhere in his mind that it might be dangerous to walk along the railroad tracks while wearing headphones. It might be a little obvious to us that this is true, and it probably was obvious to him. But the unfortunate thing for him, and the unfortunate thing especially for the conductor of that train, was that the belief in Mr. Street's mind didn't result in actions in what he actually did that morning. You see, Mr. Street believed that trains might be on the way. There might be trains on a railroad track. There's railroad. There's trains that usually follow the railroad. But unless he takes actions based on his beliefs, something tragic might happen, and as a result, we find out after the fact something tragic did. How often we treat God in the very same way in our lives? We say we believe in God. We say we believe that God is moving among us. We say we believe that God is building His kingdom here in this city and here in this neighborhood and here in our communities, wherever we come from. But yet, how often do we just simply say we believe that and maybe even actually consciously believe it, but refuse to take actions as a result of our beliefs? How often do we simply ignore what God is doing? How often are we so tuned out by our surroundings and so focused on only what we want, only what we need, only what we feel like what we deserve, that we totally miss what God is providing us, what God is leading us towards for opportunities to serve Him in our places where we live, in our communities, in our workplaces. Who are we going to reflect in our daily lives? Are we going to reflect the man who's wearing headphones and walking along the railroad tracks? Or are we going to reflect Rahab? Rahab was a sinful woman. She knows that. She's not an Israelite. She's a foreigner. She's a prostitute. But yet Rahab has been paying attention to what's been going on around her. She's been paying attention that God has been moving among the Israelites. She's been seeing that the Israelites are conquering these nations east of the Jordan. She heard that God had led the Israelites out of Egypt and crossed the Red Sea. She heard and believed that God was moving among these people. And so all of a sudden, opportunity knocks, literally comes to her front door when these two men show up at her doorstep. And all of a sudden, she has an opportunity to take action based on her beliefs. She has an opportunity to participate in God's mission. And she does so dramatically. She lies to the king's men, the king's army, who show up at her front door, and completely lies to them that she sent the spies out back towards the Jordan River. She completely betrays her own king, her own people, because she knows by her faith that God is bigger than the king of Jericho. She believes that God is mightier than the walled city, the largest walled city on the western side of the Jordan River. And so she puts action to her faith. She steps out, and if she was caught, she knows that she would have been killed. She would have been strung up for her treachery. This is treason. You don't survive something like this. She's already someone who's probably not very well looked upon in her community. She's a prostitute. She's looked down upon. So now she's taking it one step further and lying to the king about these men who have come to spy on the land. But yet she believes that God is bigger than this. She believes that the God of Israel, the God, the Lord of creation, can do something mighty through her if she steps out of faith and takes action based on her beliefs. So we have to ask ourselves this morning again, are we going to reflect the man wearing the earbuds? Or are we going to reflect Rahab in our day-to-day lives? Are we going to go through life solely focused on ourselves and completely tuned out by what is happening among us, by what God is doing in our midst? Are we going to actually tune in to where God is moving in our midst, in our communities, in our workplaces, in our city, and join Him in His mission of healing and redemption, of grace and love and peace? Are we too absorbed in our need to have the nicest house and the newest car on the block to notice there's a family maybe 2 or 3 houses down from us who's facing foreclosure? Are we so annoyed over the inconvenience of being asked to work an extra hour or two that we overlook the fact that we have some coworkers who were just laid off? Are we so wrapped up, are we too wrapped up in returning an eye for an eye in the drama that is happening in our family to even consider the orphans and the widows in our midst who celebrate every holiday alone throughout the rest of their lives? Are we too frustrated by the little things our spouse does or doesn't do to annoy us to recognize the wounds in his or her life that have gone unhealed for decades? Are we so irritated by a mistake in our overly complicated order at dinner that we cheat the single mother serving us out of a tip so that she can feed her hungry children? Are we so focused on how much time and energy our children require to consider the countless would-be parents who battle with guilt and depression needlessly due to their inability to conceive. We claim to believe that Jesus is the Lord of our world. We claim to believe that Jesus is building his kingdom here, and he's invited us to be a part of that kingdom-building project. We claim to firmly believe that God has commanded us to do two things, and only two things in our world: to love him and to love everybody else. That's it. But what do our actions tell us about what we actually believe? Are we more focused on ourselves than God, where he's moving, and the others who desperately need to feel him and to know he's real? It's quite simple to take part in God's kingdom-building mission. That's part of the beauty of this story, the story of Rahab, is it takes very little to join God in what he's doing in our world. By simply taking notice about what he's doing among us, by simply taking notice of what he's doing in our city, in our neighborhoods, in our workplaces, wherever we may find ourselves, and join him in his efforts by loving him and loving others. That's all it takes. The less we focus on ourselves and the more we focus on how God is moving in our midst, the more we will find ourselves getting involved in God's kingdom-building mission in our midst. I don't know if you pay attention to the news much. I do. I try to stay in tune with what's going on in the area. But Pittsburgh's been getting a lot of attention. International attention, in fact, the past 5, 6, 7 years. Pittsburgh is the fastest growing city in the United States, according to some right now. If you saw the report, I think it was in April, last month, a report came out from U-Haul saying that U-Haul is having trouble getting trucks out of the city. More people are moving into Pittsburgh than are leaving. People are flocking to this city. And I'm sure part of it has to do with the fact that Hollywood loves to use this for tax exemption and all that kind of stuff to film movies here. Yeah, we've been kind of highlighted in recent years. But the fact of the matter is, Pittsburgh is growing. People are moving here. People are coming here. People want to be a part of this city because, for one part, because there's jobs here. And when there's jobs here, that means the housing market's doing all right. The housing market didn't crash 10 years ago when the rest of the country did. People are turning to the city and they're looking at us as the shining light at the end of the tunnel for the rest of the Rust Belt. People are looking at cities like Detroit who have been concentrating on one industry their entire existence, a failed industry that cannot seem to get itself going again. And turning from there and looking to Pittsburgh that is diversified and multiplied and decided it's going to change, becoming not a steel mecca, but a mecca of IT and medical work and business. Pittsburgh has changed and Pittsburgh is growing. And a lot of times I know us natives, we look at Pittsburgh and we say, oh, it's just Pittsburgh, it's just crumbling old city, it's just, who likes Pittsburgh? But the fact of the matter is the rest of the country, the rest of the world are looking at us, and people are coming here. God is moving here. And sometimes I think we don't notice because, it's our backyard. It's where we're from. We have an opportunity, unlike many other places in the world right now, to be sharing God's kingdom here at what's becoming kind of a crossroads of the world, but more so than anywhere else. People are leaving New York City and Los Angeles, Arizona and Florida every day to come to Pittsburgh. Are we going to take action to our faith and actually serve God and love people and love him and put action to what we believe in like Rahab? Or are we just going to tune out to the world like the man with the earbuds and completely ignore what God's doing? I pray that we will take advantage of what God is doing and step in line with him and be in tune with him so that we can join him in his kingdom building efforts. We are living in an important time in this city. And my prayer is that we will start noticing that, and we will take advantage of that. We will notice the people in our neighborhoods, our blocks, who need to know Jesus and share him with them. So that this city, when the world looks at the city, will it see a city where people are at each other's necks and are full of selfishness and greed, just trying to make an extra dollar? Or will people, when they look at the city, when the world begins to look more at the city, will they see it as the beacon, or the city on top of the hill? The kingdom of God working here. The people loving God and loving others here more so than anywhere else in the world. My prayer is that they will see the latter, and I pray that you will join us in that effort. Let's close with a word of prayer.